Hello, in today's Learning to Earn channel, we're going to be looking at heads and actually surfacing of a head. So we're looking at, if I was to remove a head, how do I check a head, and what can I do if it's not very flat? And so if I'm going to pull a head off, you should have a straight edge, and you would lay a straight edge and an X pattern across the top of the head. You want to check it going lengthwise, and you're going to want to check it going sideways. You would check that with a feeler gauge, and you want to see, can I put a feeler gauge underneath it? No head should have more than 1 or 2 thousandths warpage to it. And another way to do it, if you didn't have a straight edge, like we don't have a straight edge here right now, and so another way of doing it is to run a file across it. And running a file across a head is going to be taking high spots off. It's not really going to be, we're not machining the head down. We're just checking to see if it's flat, and any kind of surface imperfection is going to come off. And so we would be running a file across that surface to see, is it smooth, and where is it actually hitting? We have 3 different examples. This is a head that we've already started to plane, so this is called planing a head. We have another one that we haven't planed at all. So you can see it's all kind of a jumble, and it's got some still dirty looking. And then we have a really small head that goes on a gas engine over here. And so we have three different types of heads that we're going to be playing with. And we're going to show you 2 different methods. If you have a head that's really large, trying to find a flat surface that you can actually machine will be rather difficult, especially if you get into bigger engines and their head's really long. That's where you have to use a file. And so first thing I'm going to do is demonstrate planing with a file. And so I want to talk about the files themselves. Here I have 3 different files. The 2 outside files are the same file, other than this file over here. If I rotate it, and hopefully you can catch it in the light, you'll see that there's some white discoloration there. Not just because the file has been used on a surface and it's actually damaged. Anytime you see the whiteness on a file, the teeth are actually folded over and it's a damaged file. If I use this file, it's going to work. It's just going to go kind of slow. If the damage is in a certain location, maybe the lower part of the file, when I'm filing across, I'm going to be filing more on one side than the other, which is not a desired effect. So today we're going to be using a file that doesn't have any white, and it's going to be a new file. Second thing I want to talk about is never use a coarse file. We're not trying to machine this thing off. We're just trying to check for imperfections. So a file like this one that's super coarse would be a poor choice. So you wouldn't want to use that. I want to use a straight mill file, and I want it to be super fine. Having a handle on it is going to make this job a lot easier. You're going to do a lot of control with the handle part. So if I don't have a handle on there, it's going to be much more difficult to control the file and what it's doing. Anytime I'm trying to do something where I'm trying to do precise, I want to use a boxer stance. So I'm going to have left leg forward or right leg, whichever you're right or left-handed. So in my case, I'm going to put left leg forward, right leg is going to be back, so I can actually control myself, just like I'm using a hacksaw, just like I'm using a lot of things. So I can use a boxer stance, and I want to make sure that when I draw a file across this head that I put an even amount of pressure. I want to make sure that I don't start with my file partly on the head and actually file because I didn't file this edge. So I always want to make sure that I start as close to the tip as I can. So I'm going to start right out here on this edge, and I want to make sure I go all the way across the file or across the head. The other problem that most people struggle with is when I get to the end of the head, I'm putting pressure on it, your natural tendency is to drop off. Well, when I drop off, I'm changing the surface area of my file, and I'm going to round off the end. Then people are like, oh, I'm nervous, I don't want to do that. So they get down here and then they take off like an airplane. And so they don't file the end of it. You want to make sure that you start on the edge, you go all the way across, and you go straight out. So you want to have this motion that's going straight out. And this is going to look pretty easy until you try it, and then you'll think, it wasn't quite so easy. So my controls here, what's going to keep me in a plane and going up is going to be this hand over here. This hand over here is basically just guiding the file along. So I'm trying to make it even. If I push down really hard, your file will bend. And a little bit of movement, it's a couple thousandths. And what's going to happen is I'm going to file the ends and I'm still not going to file the middle. So I want to make sure that I'm putting even pressure. So when I'm filing here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put some pressure across the whole file, just so that I'm actually trying to go even. And I want to make sure, in this case, I just ran into that. So I'm going to rotate it around. So I want to make sure that when I get down here I don't hit anything. I still have a little bit of an obstacle here, so I can't get too close because I'm going to hit. So I'm going to have my hand out a little ways. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to go down and go off. It's a little easier to see what you're doing if this head is laying flat on a table. So this one over here, we have it on blocks of wood, so it's nice and flat. This one here is just at an angle. So I'm compensating and I'm going off the end. And this particular head, we've already did a little bit of draw filing on it. And so if you zero in with the camera, you'll be able to see it's really shiny. You can see my horizontal scratches going here. So I have scratches here, we have scratches over here, and then periodically we'll see some scratches in here. The object of this is not to make it 100% shiny, all vertical scratches here. I just want to kind of start seeing some random scratches in the middle, and I'm going to quit. I don't want to take too much metal off. I just want to take it to where I have less than 1,000th warpage in my head. That's all that I'm really trying to accomplish. So I'm going to draw file this thing until I can start seeing random scratches in there, and then I'm going to quit. You'll notice that the scratches from the file are on the outside. And so most heads, because of the way they're designed, there's the most heat is in the middle, gets hot, and the head's going to warp. And they virtually always warp. And the outside is going to be your high spots, inside is going to be my low spots. If I didn't draw file this and take these down, when I put my head on, my head will have less pressure in the middle than the outside. And if I have a head failure, which this one had a coolant failure between the cylinder and this cooling jacket here, it had a cooling failure started between these two. If I don't take that warpage out and I have less pressure there, it's going to tend to want to leak again. So I want to try to get it down so I have even pressure all the way across and hopefully prevent a head gasket failure. I'm going to step over to this one, and so you can see what does it look like when I first start. And I haven't even tried this one to see where it's at. So I'm going to start here right on this corner, and I'm going to use my fingers. Probably should try to hold that down a little bit better. And you can see within just a couple of strokes here, again, as we expect, this one's starting to see shiny on the outside. And not contact in the middle. So in just that many strokes, you can see we have shiny along this edge, we have shiny down along this edge. We're striking the pre-combustion chamber along here, pre-combustion chamber here, just kind of hitting it here. There's a couple of little scratches going in there. I see a couple of nicks in here. So this one won't take very many more strokes, and we should start seeing scratches going all along. So that's how you would draw file a head. Over here is a lapping table. And so this is just a solid iron flat surface. And if you have a head that's really small, it would be very difficult to take a file and try to file something so small. And so when we get down to small engines, little engines with single cylinder heads, it's easier to use a lapping table. And so in a lapping table, you can see This one has little dots on it from the original head gasket that was on it. And again, when we start to run this on this lapping table, you'll notice that we'll start hitting on this outer edge and it'll start going to the middle. So here we have a flat surface. I could either use this flat surface and I could actually put some kind of lapping compound on the table, and I could actually use the surface itself. Or in this case, we're just using a piece of sandpaper. Sandpaper is replaceable, and so we can replace the sandpaper. We can use different grits of sandpaper, that kind of stuff. The secret for whichever method you're going to use is you want to use a figure eight. And by using a figure eight, the way you move it around, if you go back and forth, you'll go back and forth and it'll actually grind and wear each side more than the middle. So you never go back and forth when you're filing. You always use a figure eight. And a figure eight will always lap something uniform. And that's true for anything that you ever lap. So in hydraulics, we will lap slippers. On hydrostats, you would lap them. We get into diesel fuels. Sometimes people will lap the injectors. You do it everything is done in a figure eight. So we'll do the same thing here. So we don't have much size here in our sandpaper, but we're going to go see if I can do a figure eight. So I'm just trying to utilize a little piece of paper that I've got here, and this head's big enough that this little piece of paper makes it a little bit challenging. After you do this for a while, you just start seeing blurry, and pretty soon you're just like, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing. But you want to try to maintain a figure eight. So, not a lot of visible stuff there. This particular piece of sandpaper is super fine, so I don't know what we were sanding last, but it's not going to file off very fast. So, if you want to zoom in on this, you'll see that we're a little bit more shiny over here. We're a little bit shiny over here. We have a couple of spots that actually is kind of hitting the high pines, and it's just barely right along this edge. So it's just kind of hitting the outer side. I'm not seeing anything on the middle, which is where I want to be. So I either want to change the sandpaper to one that's not quite so smooth, or I'm just going to do this a lot longer. So what I don't really want to do is pull out 50 grit sandpaper. Like, I'm in a hurry and I want to get this job done. So you do that and you start pushing down on this thing, and it's going to really scratch it up. If you have something that's really bad shape, you might start with this, make a couple of passes, but you really want to get something down. 120 grit is a pretty decent size. It's amazing how you think you need to be really fine, and it doesn't have to be super fine, but 50 grit is pretty aggressive. So we don't necessarily want to be that aggressive. So this paper here is probably 500 or 600 grit, and that's really too fine for this application. It'll work, it'll be nice and shiny, but you're going to work up a sweat and you're going to be at this for a while. So we don't want to do that. So, and our goal is not to change the depth of this. Our goal is to just take out the high points and get a better sealing surface and better pressure in the center where that's the cylinder itself is going to be pushing on. So the gasket's pushing on the cylinder. So single cylinder L-head engines, the old style L-head engines, have a tendency to warp. There's very common, especially where the exhaust side is. And that's what you'll see here is my exhaust pipe. We have a lot more filing on the exhaust side. On the single cylinder L-heads, the side where the exhaust valve is gets hotter, it tends to warp more, and you'll see it's a pretty incredible warpage there. And when you start doing your little filing, that's where you'll anticipate seeing those shiny spots first. Then when you're done, you got to make sure that you do a good job of cleaning, because we don't want all this fine metal down inside our engine and hurting the engine. So when we're done, we'll clean it. But simple draw filing or lapping are two methods to kind of flatten the head when it's warped. Okay, And that's it for today's Learning to Earn.